As a representative of the ARC, we are going to be presenting work on the FINDS survey, which is, stands for the Family and Individual Needs for Disability Supports. And this was a survey that when I came into the ARC just about a little over 2 years ago, I realized that there was something missing in the data, which was a contemporary, current thumbprint of what families were experiencing, especially since the fall of 2008 in terms of economic terms. So we put together, on a shoestring, a national outreach effort, which really was an evaluation to take the pulse of families, both connected to the ARC and outside of the ARC's networks, to really understand what were they experiencing in terms of lifespan issues. So everything from early education and early intervention, moving into transition, the post-secondary education, work, friends, transportation, voting, where were they living, and what were they doing in their old age. So it really was a snapshot of what families had experienced and also what their fears, concerns, hopes, and dreams were, not only for their family member that had a disability, but also for themselves. So we asked families, how are you doing? I'm going to present today on a little effort that we did about 2.5 years ago. When I joined the ARC, one of the priorities that I saw in my role as Chief Research and Innovations Officer there was to really get the pulse of what families were going through in the United States, especially post-2008 economic crash. And so what we did is we developed a grassroots, rather simple approach to capturing some data. We did that with the help of many of you in the room and the organizations that you represent. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. I am a Chicago girl, and I know Tamar Heller and Glenn and many other people that I studied under are in the room. But about a year ago, I was paying attention to the Football Hall of Fame presentation. I saw that an old Chicago Bear that I had followed back in the day, Richard Dent, was being inducted, and I was paying attention, and his coach introduced him. A little old guy, he must have been about 100. And he was introducing Richard and his character on the field, on the practice field and on the professional field. And this is what he said that really caught my attention. As far as I know, you can't teach relentless. And I sat there for a moment, and then I grabbed my whatever I had and I wrote the quote down, because I really thought that that applied in the context of families. As many of you know and experience yourself, or have seen in the field, families are relentless when trying to find solutions for their family members with intellectual disabilities. And I know as a mother of Jeffrey, who's 18 with Down syndrome, who will have nothing to do with his mother at this stage in his life, I'm also experiencing that as a mother. And you really try to put the threads of solutions together the best way you can. So on to this. The FINDS survey, Family and Individual Needs for Disability Supports, was an effort that the ARC put together. We amassed questions derived by an advisory group of people with intellectual disabilities, family members, professionals, and it was a comprehensive, it sought to obtain comprehensive perspectives from family members across the lifespan, connected to intellectual and developmental disabilities specifically. So we felt that this was something rather unique in the field, that it really did target the families connected to IDD. We contracted with our good friends at the University of Minnesota, and I'd like to point out Sherry Larson, the brilliant Sherry Larson, who managed and coordinated the official data analysis. So if you have any problems with the data, she's right over here. But there was a great team to work with at University of Minnesota. And what both of these reports are on our website. This is the actual report that we came out with. Still in the shadows with their future uncertain. I'm still wrestling with the syntax on that. And then also the technical report, which really is the hard data that the University of Minnesota has created in collaboration with us. So real briefly, the methodology was a pretty basic online survey, and we knew that we were taking risks with the methodology on that. And we did it anyway because we thought it would be at least capturing some current data. We leveraged outreach through our friends, and many of them, again, are in the room. Thank you again for helping us. And the target audience was, because it was an online survey, internet connected, English speaking, of parents or professional caregivers of people with IDD. We did attempt to do a survey to people with intellectual disabilities, but the results of that just proved what we had suspected, that the methodology really needs to be much different, so those results are not included. It was live from July through October, and we used SurveyMonkey. So we had almost 5,000 respondents, and I'm going to gloss over this. The sample is certainly limited. Mostly white females with some college. Again, we look at the sample as probably more privileged than people that might not have discretionary income or access to the internet. Certainly, cultures that don't speak English. A lot of limitations here. Again, we were looking at the incomes, and you can see that this is a fairly affluent group. And then because we really wanted to focus on IDD, we did provide some very strong suggestions on the surveys that this is really specifically for intellectual and disability connected caregivers or families. And so when we broke out the respondents, this is what we came up with. Most of the people were connected to intellectual disability or autism. So we looked at the different domains, education, and that included post-secondary outcomes. We looked at transition, residential, where are they living. Some of the data that's not presented here, we looked at what people were doing with their lives. Are they voting? Are they outside? Are they integrated with recreation and their social lives? We also looked at, of course, employment, and actually how the caregivers themselves were doing. And there were, I really encourage you to look at the report, and you can see that there were many different domains that are not necessarily being reported here. So when we were looking at the education outcomes, we saw that they were reporting that almost half are receiving some sort of certificate, and that a concerning outcome was that transition planning is beginning at age 17. And so it really dawned on us, and anecdotally, we know this, but the adulthood really sort of happens upon families, and they're not prepared for it, and they start often too late, again, from this sample. And you would think that this sample might have been, because of their more affluent profiles, that they might have been a little bit more on the ball. So this was something that we just paid attention to. We also saw fairly high satisfaction rates with high school. And these are just simple Likert scale, but when we put the responses together, generally people were satisfied with how their family members experienced high school. And this, I think, ties into one of the earlier presentations when we were looking at inclusion. And again, just broad brushstrokes here, but we're seeing that throughout the three different levels of school, where families are reporting that they're experiencing levels of inclusion. Still, partial inclusion is something that seems to be the most active here. And you can look at this either in a glass half full or the margarita is almost gone. You know, so I think it's a healthy indication we're moving in the right direction, but we're also seeing these families are reporting that the choices they've made with their family members have been not full inclusion, however that might be defined. I thought this was fascinating. Post-secondary education for people with intellectual disabilities, and I know Bill Kiernan's in the room, and I'm such a big fan of the thinkcollege.net. You know, I think I should be on your payroll. Where would you go? Yeah, I should be on your payroll. I mean, I really drive more people to the thinkcollege.net when I encounter a family that says, you know, what are you doing with your child? They're 18. And that, well, we won't know. We'll go to this website and look at it. So this was a question that was important to put in. Look at that number. 58% of the families reported that it was important to continue education after high school. I think this is very exciting. The IDEA has been in play for many, many years now, and we're seeing generations of young children now matriculate through that. And to me, I look at this and I say, you know, there is, this may be evidence that the expectations are being raised, and that children who are going through inclusive education, along with other peers that may also have aspirations for post-secondary, that's rubbing off on the elbows of the people that are going to school. And I know Jeffrey fully expects to be rooting for some, you know, major football team as a college student. So this is a hopeful indicator. But at the same time, and some of this data, you know, looking at college experience, still looking at ensuring that people that reported to have Asperger's or some really high intellectual functioning disability don't muddy up the data a little bit. And I think that might be the case here, that if you're, you know, truly have a college degree or advanced degrees, that the chance that you have a cognitive impairment, which is something that we just need to look at a little bit more in the data. And so we get to jobs. And I thought this was very interesting in terms of what families were reporting. The preferred setting for families for their people with intellectual disabilities is that they really wanted to have a regular job in the community. We're also seeing a significant population in this sample that are still saying, you know, shelter employment it's the right setting for my family member. The enclave setting and self-employment are lower down in terms of the reporting statistics. But going back to that sheltered workshop, as many of you most likely know from your own experiences, what takes place in a space, whether it's called a sheltered workshop or supported employment, and again, with Bill in the room, I'm really, really nervous talking about this, but what takes place in that space is some people love it for their family members. Some family members who are working there love it. Some people go there, they try community-based employment, they come back because that's where their friends are. An area that might not have been studied a lot. But one of the things that I really thought this was important is paying attention to that 19%. There's still families out there that think that that is the best option. In terms of housing, some of the data on family demographics showed that there is a decrease in the number of people that are living with their families, and there's an increase of people that are living elsewhere. This number, 78%, thank you, are currently living with family members. In terms of the housing, this was part of the data that was very concerning to us because families didn't have a plan. They are worried about the future, But at that last bullet there, 62% of the caregivers don't have a plan for future housing. And so that was just something that we're very concerned about at the ARC. This slide really illustrates some of the more articulate data that was presented earlier this morning. And I really want to move to the family caregiving, because families are relentless, yet their resiliency, I think, is certainly at risk. They're under great strain, and our data is showing this. Family caregivers provide a range of supports across the spectrum. And so we ask caregivers to report in on how much support they're actually giving, just in terms of time. And look at this. 80 plus hours a week, 41 to 80 hours. And when you think about that in terms of how do you give that kind of time, in this economic environment, if you're now down to if you're married, you're down to a single income. If you are a single parent and you have to work, yet this is the kind of care that your family member demands or needs, this was something that we were just looking at. Sources of funding, and I'm going to move on to, I think, just in the interest of time, 1 out of 5 families had to quit a job to stay home to provide care for their families. So when you look at that in terms of a community, what does that do to the economics? And then when you think about how many people with intellectual disabilities there are in the United States, 67% unable to pursue their own work and career goals, most of them are women. They don't have enough money to pay for care. They have more caregiving responsibilities than they can handle. They're physically fatigued, emotionally stressed, personal relationships and health are diving, and their marriages are being affected. And they worry. They don't know what's going to happen in the future. And they don't have savings, and they don't take vacation. Many of these findings are not unusual compared to some of the other studies that are going on and have been already in there. But the data does reflect that presence of intellectual disabilities increases risks at all levels. Innovative family support is going to be critical. And we're looking at a couple big demographic balloons right now. We're looking at, I see Gloria's back there, and the CDC with their new report on the autism and the increased prevalence. Does anybody think that number is just going to stay there? You know, what does that do to IDD? What's interesting is many people with autism or families are not identifying as with the disability community. They're still looking at it as a medical model. It's just interesting. We're looking at the confluence of the aging industry in terms of direct support workers and where we're going to be fighting for those people for caregiving. What does that do to our families? So I'm really hoping that these minds in this room can really come up with looking at the problem with a new lens, not necessarily relying on old institutional support systems as we've known them, because I think it is a new age, and families are definitely going to need the help. Thank you very much for your time and your attention.